Hello and good night. Welcome to another bedtime story. This story is meant to help you sleep or to relax your mind. Try and find a comfortable place, such as your bed or a soft chair. If you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes now. Try and let go of the day as we begin our tale. Tonight's story is the Swan Princess. Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom nestled between rolling green hills and shimmering lakes, there lived a beautiful princess named Odette. She was the only daughter of King William and Queen Eleanor, beloved by all who knew her for her grace, kindness, and radiant beauty. But despite her charmed life, Odette's fate was to be shaped not by her royal bloodline, but by a curse that would change her life forever. Odette spent her days exploring the lush forests and crystal clear lakes near her castle. She was particularly fond of a hidden lake surrounded by tall willows and wildflowers, a place so serene it seemed almost magical. It was here that Odette often came to escape the pressures of palace life, accompanied only by her loyal swan-shaped locket, a gift from her late mother. In a neighboring kingdom, a young prince named Derek was growing into a fine and noble man. From the time they were children, Odette and Derek had been promised to one another by their parents, who hoped their union would unite their kingdoms in peace and prosperity. Every summer, Odette and Derek were brought together to spend time at King William's castle. But their early encounters were fraught with awkwardness and misunderstandings. Derek often teased Odette, and she in turn found him arrogant. Despite their rocky start, the two grew up together, and their feelings began to evolve from friendship into something deeper. One fateful summer, during a grand ball held to celebrate their engagement, Derek gazed at Odette as she descended the staircase, her gown shimmering like moonlight. For the first time, he saw her not as the girl he had sparred with in childhood, but as the woman he wanted to spend his life with. Overcome with emotion, Derek declared his love for her in front of the assembled court. But when Odette asked him why he loved her, Derek stumbled, mentioning only her beauty. Hurt and disappointed, Odette left the ball, wondering if Derek's love was genuine or superficial. As the summer came to an end, Odette and her father began their journey back to their kingdom. Their carriage wound through dense forests and narrow mountain passes. But their travels were interrupted by the appearance of a dark figure blocking their path. It was Thrushbeard, a powerful sorcerer who had long coveted King William's throne. With a wave of his staff, Thrushbeard summoned an army of shadowy creatures, overpowering the royal guards. He seized Odette and, despite King William's desperate attempts to protect her, disappeared into the night. Thrushbeard took Odette to the hidden lake she loved so dearly, where he revealed his sinister plan. He sought to force her into marriage, claiming that with her as his bride, he could legitimize his claim to her father's kingdom. When Odette refused, Rothbird's eyes blazed with fury. "If I cannot have you as my queen, then you shall remain here, trapped in a form that ensures no one else will have you either." With those words, he cast a powerful curse, transforming her into a swan. She would remain in this form by day, regaining her human shape only under the light of the moon. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Odette, now a swan, lived at the enchanted lake. Her only companions, a group of kind-hearted animals who also dwelled there. Speed, a thoughtful turtle. Jean Bob, a frog who fancied himself a prince. And Puffin, a brave and resourceful bird. Though her new friends did their best to keep her spirits up, Odette often gazed at her reflection in the water, longing for her old life and wondering if Derek had forgotten her. Meanwhile, back in his kingdom, Derek was consumed by grief and guilt over Odette's disappearance. Convinced that she was still alive, he scoured the land, searching for any trace of her. One evening, while hunting near the enchanted lake, Derek spotted a magnificent swan gliding across the water. Something about the swan's graceful movements and the sadness in its eyes drew him closer. To his astonishment, as the moon rose, the swan transformed before his eyes into Odette. "Odette!" Derek cried, rushing to her side. Overwhelmed, they embraced, and Odette explained the curse that bound her to the lake. Derek vowed to break the spell and defeat Rothbird, but Odette warned him of the sorcerer's power. "The curse can only be broken by a vow of everlasting love," she said. "A vow made before the whole world." Derek's resolve only deepened. "Then I will make that vow, Odette. I will tell the world of my love for you, and together we will defeat Rothbird." But Rothbird was always watching. When he discovered Derek's presence at the lake, he devised a plan to ensure the curse would never be broken. Using his dark magic, he created a doppelganger of Odette, a false princess named Odile, who would attend the royal ball in Odette's place. Rothbird intended for Derek to make his vow to Odile, believing her to be Odette, and thus doom the true princess to remain a swan forever. On the night of the ball, Derek announced his intention to make his vow of everlasting love. Odette, trapped at the lake, watched helplessly as Rothbird's plan unfolded. Odile, disguised as Odette, danced with Derek, mirroring her every move and word. Derek, believing he was finally reuniting with his beloved, declared his love before the entire court. As soon as the words left his lips, Rothbird appeared, laughing triumphantly. "You have sealed her fate," Rothbird sneered. "The vow was made to the wrong woman." Realizing his mistake, Derek fled the palace and raced to the lake. When he arrived, he found Odette lying weakly on the shore, her swan form flickering. "Odette," he cried, cradling her in his arms. "I'm so sorry. Please don't leave me." Odette opened her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Derek, you must stop Rothbird. He's too powerful to face alone. Use your heart not just your strength. With renewed determination, Derek confronted Thrushbeard at the lake. The sorcerer unleashed his full power, transforming into a monstrous creature. Derek fought bravely, wielding his bow and arrows, but it was not enough to defeat Thrushbeard. In the final moments of their battle, Derek remembered Odette's words and turned his attention to the swan-shaped locket she had always worn. Realizing it held the key to breaking the curse, Derek used the locket to channel the power of their love. The locket glowed with a brilliant light, overwhelming Thrushbeard and breaking his dark magic. The sorcerer was vanquished, and his spells were undone. Odette, now fully restored to her human form, ran to Derek's side. They embraced as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, their love stronger than ever. With Thrushbeard's defeat, peace returned to the kingdom. Derek and Odette were married in a joyous ceremony attended by friends, family, and the creatures of the enchanted lake. Their union brought their kingdoms together, fulfilling the dreams of their parents and ensuring a bright future for their people. Though their journey had been fraught with trials, Derek and Odette's love had proven unbreakable. They ruled with wisdom and compassion, and their story became a legend that inspired generations. And so, the tale of the Swan Princess and her prince became a testament to the power of love, courage, and perseverance, and they lived happily ever after. The end. The Princess and the Goblin. Once upon a time, in a mountainous kingdom, there lived a young princess named Irene. She was a curious and bright child with golden curls and eyes that seemed to sparkle with curiosity. She lived in a grand but lonely castle nestled in the foothills of a great mountain. Her father, the king, was a noble and wise ruler, but he was often away tending to affairs of state. For her safety, Irene was kept away from the bustling cities and confined to the castle, surrounded by caretakers and maids who ensured that her every need was met. The castle, however, was not as serene as it seemed. Beneath the mountain lay a labyrinth of tunnels and caverns where goblins dwelled. These creatures were grotesque and cunning, with bulbous noses, twisted limbs, and a hatred for sunlight. They despised humans, blaming them for their exile into the darkness of the earth. Over time, they had become bitter and vengeful, plotting schemes to cause trouble for the people of the kingdom. The castle guards were aware of the goblins, but believed them to be little more than a nuisance. They underestimated their cunning and malice. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Irene sat in her nursery, listening to her nurse, Luti, tell stories. Irene loved the tales of brave knights and wise queens, but she often wondered about the world beyond the castle walls. That night, as she gazed out her window at the silver moonlight illuminating the rugged peaks, she felt a deep longing to explore. Unbeknownst to her, the goblins were hatching a sinister plan. They had grown tired of living underground and desired revenge against the humans who lived above them. Their king, a crafty and cruel figure, had decided to kidnap Princess Irene and force her to marry his son, a brutish goblin prince. In doing so, they hoped to claim the mountain and its treasures as their own. The goblins were not the only ones stirring that night. Irene's great-great-grandmother, a mysterious and magical figure, watched over her from a hidden chamber high in the castle. This ancient woman, who appeared young and radiant, despite her centuries of age, was known only to a select few. She possessed knowledge and powers beyond imagination and had taken a special interest in Irene, sensing that the princess was destined for greatness. One day, while exploring the castle, Irene discovered a spiral staircase she had never noticed before. Her curiosity piqued. She climbed the stairs, winding higher and higher until she reached a small, sunlit room. There, seated by a spinning wheel, was her great-great-grandmother. The old woman greeted her warmly and introduced herself. Irene was enchanted by her beauty and wisdom, and she began to visit her often. During one of these visits, her great-great-grandmother gave her a magical gift. A fine thread spun from her wheel, so light and strong that it was nearly invisible. She placed it in a ring and told Irene, "If you are ever in danger, follow this thread and it will lead you to safety." Meanwhile, in a nearby village, a miner's son named Curdy worked diligently alongside his father. Curdy was a clever and brave boy, well liked by everyone in the village. He often ventured into the mines, where he had learned to recognize the goblins' handiwork. Unlike most, Curdy understood the goblins' ways and had devised clever tricks to thwart them. He knew their weaknesses. They feared sunlight, and their soft, unshod feet were vulnerable to being stepped on. Most importantly, they could not bear singing, as music was repellent to them. One evening, while working late in the mines, Curdy overheard a group of goblins discussing their plan to kidnap Princess Irene. Alarmed, he decided to warn the castle. He made his way through the dark tunnels, singing loudly to keep the goblins at bay. When he reached the castle gates, the guards were skeptical of his story, but Curdy's earnestness convinced them to inform the castle steward. Back in the castle, Irene's life took an unexpected turn. One night, she awoke to a strange noise outside her window. The goblins had begun their plan, and their stealthy movements in the shadows sent shivers down her spine. Remembering her great-great-grandmother's words, she followed the magical thread. It led her out of her room, through the castle, and into the night. Though frightened, Irene felt a sense of calm, trusting the thread to guide her. The thread led her to Curdy, who had been keeping watch near the castle. Surprised to see the princess, he quickly realized that the goblins were closer than he had thought. Together, they devised a plan to stop the goblins. Irene's bravery impressed Curdie, and he vowed to protect her. The goblins, meanwhile, had tunneled their way into the castle's lower levels. They believed their plan was foolproof, but they had underestimated the resourcefulness of Irene and Curdie. Using the magical thread, Irene led Curdie through the labyrinthine passages of the castle, where they discovered the goblins' entry point. With Curdie's knowledge of the goblins' weaknesses, they devised traps and barriers to stop their advance. When the goblins finally emerged, they were met with fierce resistance. Curdie's clever tactics and Irene's bravery turned the tide of the battle. They used sunlight, music, and quick thinking to drive the goblins back into their tunnels. The Goblin King, realizing his plan had failed, retreated with his army, vowing revenge. In the aftermath, the king returned to the castle and learned of his daughter's courage. He was deeply proud of her and grateful to Curdie for his bravery. Irene introduced her father to her great-great-grandmother, who had guided her throughout the ordeal. Though the king could not see the old woman, he trusted Irene's words and understood that a higher power had been watching over them. Curdie was hailed as a hero and offered a place in the castle. But he chose to return to his village, where he continued to work in the mines. He and Irene remained close friends, however, bound by the extraordinary adventure they had shared. As for the goblins, they retreated deeper into the mountains, their power diminished. They never again dared to challenge the humans, and peace returned to the kingdom. Irene grew into a wise and compassionate ruler, inspired by the lessons of her great-great-grandmother and the courage of her friend Curdie. And so, the story of the princess and the goblin became a legend, a tale of bravery, friendship, and the triumph of light over darkness, passed down through generations as a reminder of the power of trust and courage. And Princess Irene and Curdie lived happily ever after. The end. King Thrushbeard. Once upon a time, there was a proud and beautiful princess who lived in a grand castle. She was so lovely that many kings and princes traveled from distant lands to ask her for her hand in marriage. However, her beauty was matched only by her arrogance. She scorned all her suitors, finding fault with each one and mocking them cruelly. One day, her father, the king, organized a grand feast and invited all the eligible noblemen and princes from neighboring kingdoms. They gathered in the great hall, eager to win the princess's favor. One by one, they presented themselves to her, hoping for her approval. The first prince was tall and handsome, but the princess sneered. "He's too tall. He looks like a beanpole." The second prince was strong and broad-shouldered, but she laughed. "He's too fat. He looks like a barrel." The third prince had a kind and gentle face, but she mocked him. "He's too pale. He looks like he's never seen the sun." Among the suitors was a young king who had a kind face and pointy-trimmed beard. He was wise, noble, and kind, but the princess ridiculed even him. "His beard looks like a thrush's nest. I shall call him King Thrushbeard," she said, and everyone laughed at her sharp wit. The young king flushed with embarrassment but said nothing. He simply bowed and left the hall, his heart heavy. The king, her father, was deeply ashamed of his daughter's behavior. After all the suitors had gone, he turned to her with a stern expression. "You have mocked and insulted every man who came to seek your hand," he said. "Your pride and cruelty have gone too far. I will not allow you to treat people this way any longer. To teach you humility, I vow that you shall marry the very next beggar who comes to the castle." The princess thought her father was jesting, but he was deadly serious. The next morning, as fate would have it, a poor minstrel arrived at the castle gates, singing for his supper. The king summoned him to the great hall and declared, "You shall marry my daughter." The princess was horrified. "Father, no, you cannot mean this," she cried. But the king's decision was final. "You mock the noblemen and princes who sought your hand," he said. "Now you will learn what it means to live humbly." The minstrel, surprised but delighted by his sudden fortune, accepted the king's decree. The princess was dressed in plain clothes and led away from the castle. She wept bitterly as she left her home, accompanied by her new husband. The minstrel's home was a modest cottage in a small village. It was nothing like the grand castle she had lived in all her life. When they arrived, the minstrel said, "This is our home. You must learn to manage the household, for we are poor and there are no servants here." The princess had never done a day of work in her life. She stumbled clumsily through her chores, spilling water, breaking dishes, and burning the food. The minstrel was patient but firm. "You must try harder," he said. "We cannot afford waste." To earn their keep, the minstrel went out to sing in nearby towns, while the princess stayed behind to tend the house. Her hands became rough from scrubbing floors, and her once delicate skin grew weathered. She began to understand how hard life was for ordinary people and regretted her past arrogance. One day, the minstrel said, "We cannot survive on my singing alone. You must help earn our living. I have arranged for you to work in the king's castle as a kitchen maid." The princess was humiliated, but agreed. She worked in the castle kitchens, scrubbing pots and pans, and carrying heavy buckets of water. The other servants teased her for her clumsiness and called her Princess Ragged. She swallowed her pride, however, and endured their taunts, determined to make amends for her past behavior. One evening, there was great excitement in the castle. A grand feast was being held in honor of the young king, King Thrushbeard. The princess watched from the shadows as the noble guests arrived, dressed in fine clothes and glittering jewels. Her heart ached with longing for the life she had lost. As the feast began, the princess was tasked with carrying trays of food into the great hall. She kept her head down, hoping no one would recognize her. But as she approached the head table, she froze. There, seated in a place of honor, was the very man she had mocked so cruelly, King Thrushbeard. Their eyes met, and the princess felt a rush of shame. She turned to flee, but the king called out to her. "Wait," he said. "Come here." Trembling, she approached the table. The king looked at her with a kind but serious expression. "Do you remember me?" he asked. "Yes, Your Majesty," she whispered. "I am deeply sorry for my behavior. I have learned how wrong I was to mock you and the others who sought my hand." The king nodded. "I know you have," he said, "for I was the minstrel who married you." The princess gasped in astonishment. "You?" "Yes," the king said. "I disguised myself to teach you a lesson in humility. I wanted to see if you could change, and you have. You have endured hardship with grace and learned the value of kindness and hard work." The princess's eyes filled with tears. "I am so sorry for the way I treated you. Can you ever forgive me?" The king smiled. "I already have," he said. "And now, it is time for you to take your rightful place by my side." And he took her hand and led her to a private chamber, where she was dressed in the finest gown she had ever seen. When she returned to the great hall, the guests marveled at her beauty and grace. The feast became a celebration of their union, and the princess vowed to be a kind and compassionate queen. From that day forwards, the princess and King Thrushbeard ruled together with wisdom and humility. The princess never forgot the lessons she had learned and became beloved by her people for her kindness and generosity. And so, they lived happily ever after. The end. The Princess and the Pea. Once upon a time, in a kingdom nestled between rolling green hills and sparkling rivers, there lived a prince who longed to marry a true princess. He was not content with the title alone. He sought someone with a heart full of kindness, a mind full of wisdom, and a soul as gentle and noble as the finest melodies sung by the court bards. Though many young women claimed to be princesses, the prince could never be sure if their claims were true or if their noble airs were but a facade. The prince's parents, the king and queen, sympathized with their son's plight. They too wished for him to find a worthy companion. So they sent out heralds to every corner of the land, inviting princesses far and wide to the royal court. In no time, the palace was bustling with noble women from distant lands, each vying for the prince's hand. Yet, despite their beauty, wit, and charm, none seemed to capture the prince's heart. Something always felt amiss. One stormy evening, as thunder roared and rain lashed against the castle's stone walls, a knock echoed through the grand oak doors of the palace. The guards, puzzled by the late hour and the tempest outside, opened the door to reveal a young woman drenched from head to toe. Her hair clung to her face, and her clothes, though finely made, were muddied and torn from travel. She shivered as she stepped into the warm glow of the palace's great hall. "Who are you?" asked the queen, stepping forward with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The young woman curtsied, her movements graceful, despite her bedraggled appearance. "Your Majesty, I am Princess Alicia of the Northern Isles. My ship was caught in the storm, and I was separated from my staff. I humbly seek shelter for the night." The queen raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She had heard tales of impostors claiming royal lineage to gain favor or shelter in palaces. Still, it wasn't against her nature to turn anyone away, especially on such a harsh night. She beckoned the servants to bring dry clothes and a hot meal for the young woman. The prince, who had been seated by the fire reading, watched the scene unfold. He found himself drawn to Alicia's composed demeanor despite her disheveled state. Her voice carried a quiet confidence, and her eyes, though tired, sparkled with intelligence. After Alicia was warmed and fed, the queen pulled the prince aside. "She claims to be a princess," the queen whispered, "but how can we be certain? There are many who would take advantage of our generosity." The prince frowned. "Do we always need certainty, mother? Sometimes the truth reveals itself in time." The queen, however, was not one to leave things to chance. That night, she devised a plan to test Alicia's claim. She ordered the servants to prepare a grand guest chamber for the princess, but gave them very specific instructions. Beneath the mountain of plush mattresses and feather-filled quilts on the bed, the queen placed a single pea. "If she is truly a princess," the queen explained to her ladies-in-waiting, "she will feel the pea through all the bedding. Only someone of the finest breeding and sensitivity could detect such a thing." The next morning, the queen and the prince awaited Alicia in the dining hall. When she arrived, her expression was polite but wary, with faint circles under her eyes. "Good morning, princess," the queen said, studying her closely. "I trust you slept well?" Alicia hesitated, then curtsied. "Your Majesty, your hospitality is most gracious, and the bed was exquisite. Yet I fear I must admit that I barely slept a wink. There seemed to be something hard beneath the mattresses that made it impossible to rest comfortably." The queen's eyes widened. She turned to her son, who looked equally surprised, but also intrigued. Alicia continued, "I mean no disrespect, of course. It's just that the bed, while luxurious, did not quite agree with me." At that moment, the queen's doubts vanished. Only a true princess, so delicate and attuned, could have felt the tiny pea beneath so many layers. With a knowing smile, she clasped Alicia's hands. "My dear, you have proven yourself to be exactly who you claim to be. Welcome to our home." Alicia looked puzzled but grateful, thanking the queen and the prince for their kindness. Over the following days, as the storm abated and her staff arrived to escort her back to the Northern Isles, the prince found himself spending every available moment in Alicia's company. They spoke of books, of music, of their hopes and dreams. He admired her wit, her curiosity, and the gentle strength that had carried her through the storm. When the time came for Alicia to depart, the prince found it impossible to let her go. He stood before the gates of the palace as her carriage was prepared. "Alicia," he said, his voice earnest, "I have searched far and wide for someone like you. Will you do me the honor of staying, of becoming my bride?" Alicia's cheeks flushed, and her eyes glistened with emotion. "Your Highness, I would be honored. But are you certain? We have only just met." The prince smiled. "Sometimes the heart knows more in a moment than the mind could in a lifetime." And so, Princess Alicia and the prince were married in a grand celebration that united their kingdoms. The story of the pea beneath the mattresses became legend, a tale passed down through generations as a testament to the importance of truth, sensitivity, and love. As for the pea, it was preserved in a crystal case and displayed in the Royal Museum, a small but powerful reminder of the night a true princess proved her worth in the most unlikely way. And they all lived happily ever after. The end. The Prince and the Pauper. Once upon a time, in the bustling city of London, during the reign of King Henry VIII, two boys were born on the same day, under vastly different circumstances. One boy was Edward Tudor, Prince of Wales, heir to the English throne, and born into wealth, power, and privilege. The other was Tom Canty, a pauper, born in the slums of Awful Court, where life was a daily struggle against hunger and despair. Though their worlds were separated by social standing, fate had plans to intertwine their lives in the most extraordinary way. Edward Tudor grew up in a world of grandeur. His every whim was catered to him by servants, and he was surrounded by opulent splendor. He was tutored by the finest scholars in the realm, learning history, politics, and languages, all in preparation for his future role as king. Yet, for all his privilege, Edward longed to experience life beyond the palace walls. The stories he heard of the bustling city streets and the people who lived there fascinated him. He yearned to see the world his subjects inhabited, a world he only knew from books and tales. Tom Canty, on the other hand, grew up in abject poverty. He lived in a dilapidated tenement with his abusive father, John Canty, and his kind-hearted but powerless mother. His days were spent begging for scraps of food or being forced to steal by his father. Despite his harsh upbringing, Tom had a vivid imagination and a deep love for stories of knights, princes, and noble deeds. He often dreamed of a life of comfort and adventure, far removed from the filth and cruelty of Awful Court. Tom's only solace was Father Andrew, a kind old priest who taught him how to read and write and filled his mind with tales of a better world. One fateful day, driven by curiosity, Tom wandered further than usual, making his way to the gates of Westminster Palace. His ragged appearance drew jeers and scorn from the guards, But Tom was undeterred. He craned his neck, hoping for a glimpse of the grandeur within. By chance, Prince Edward was passing nearby and noticed the commotion. Intrigued by the sight of a boy his own age being mistreated, Edward approached the gates and ordered the guards to let Tom through. Tom could hardly believe his eyes as he stepped into the palace grounds. The prince, struck by the boy's humility and awe, invited him inside. Edward asked Tom about his life, and Tom, though hesitant at first, recounted the struggles of his daily existence. Edward listened intently, horrified by the hardships Tom described. In turn, Edward shared stories of palace life, which Tom found equally astonishing. The boys quickly discovered they shared a striking resemblance, almost as if they were twins. This resemblance sparked an idea in Edward's mind. "Let us exchange clothes," Edward proposed, his eyes alight with excitement. "Just for a short while. I wish to see the world as you do, and you can experience life as a prince." Tom hesitated, worried about the consequences, but the prince's enthusiasm was infectious. Reluctantly, he agreed. They swapped clothes, and as they gazed at each other, they were astonished by how perfectly they could pass for one another. Edward handed Tom his royal seal, saying, "Keep this safe. It is proof of who I am." Dressed in Tom's rags, Edward slipped out of the palace, eager to explore the city. Meanwhile, Tom, now clad in the prince's finery, found himself surrounded by attendants, who immediately mistook him for Edward. The bewildered boy tried to explain the truth, but no one would listen. His protests were dismissed as a jest, or worse, as signs of madness. Overwhelmed, Tom decided to play along, hoping Edward would return soon to set things right. Edward, meanwhile, wandered the streets of London, marveling at the sights and sounds. However, his excitement quickly turned to dismay. The guards who had mocked Tom earlier now treated Edward with equal disdain, believing him to be just another beggar. When Edward tried to assert his true identity, he was met with laughter and derision. "A prince, are you?" sneered a burly shopkeeper. "You'd better move along before I call the watch." Edward's royal upbringing had left him ill-prepared for the harsh realities of life outside the palace. He soon found himself hungry, cold, and alone. To make matters worse, he was accosted by John Canty, who mistook him for Tom and dragged him back to Awful Court. There, Edward experienced the brutality of Tom's life firsthand, enduring the scorn of Canty and the hardships of the slums. Back at the palace, Tom struggled to adapt to his new role as prince. He was baffled by the complexities of court etiquette and overwhelmed by the constant demands of royal life. Despite his initial fear, Tom's natural intelligence and quick thinking helped him navigate the challenges. He used his newfound authority to make small changes, showing kindness to servants and advocating for the poor. His actions earned him the admiration of the court, though some whispered that the prince's recent behavior was odd and out of character. Days turned into weeks, and both boys grew increasingly desperate to return to their rightful places. Edward, still trapped in Awful Court, finally managed to escape Canty's clutches. With the help of a kind-hearted vagabond named Miles Hendon, Edward began his journey back to the palace. Miles, though skeptical of Edward's claim to be the prince, took pity on the boy and became his protector. As Edward and Miles made their way to Westminster, they encountered the harsh realities of life in England. Edward witnessed the suffering of his people, the cruelty of the law, the poverty, and the injustices faced by the common folk. These experiences opened his eyes to the responsibility of kingship and deepened his resolve to be a just and compassionate ruler. Meanwhile, Tom's position at court grew increasingly precarious. The royal advisors pressed him to make decisions he felt unqualified to handle, and the weight of the crown became a heavy burden. Despite his best efforts, Tom knew he could not maintain the charade much longer. He longed for his old life, difficult as it was, and prayed for Edward's return. The turning point came during a grand ceremony to crown Tom as king. As the Archbishop prepared to place the crown on Tom's head, a commotion erupted at the back of the hall. Edward, having finally arrived with Miles's help, pushed through the crowd and shouted, "I am the true Prince of Wales." The attendants gasped, their eyes darting between Edward and Tom. The resemblance was uncanny, and confusion reigned. Tom, relieved to see Edward, stepped forward and bowed. "Your Majesty," he said, "this is the true prince. I am but a pauper who took his place by mistake." Edward produced the royal seal as proof of his identity. The court erupted in astonished murmurs, but the evidence was undeniable. The king, though frail and nearing the end of his reign, confirmed Edward's claim, and the ceremony was halted. Tom, now free of the burden of kingship, felt a wave of relief. After the confusion subsided, Edward took Tom's hand and addressed the court. "This boy may be a pauper, but he has shown more wisdom and compassion than many nobles. From this day forward, he shall be my friend and advisor." True to his word, Edward rewarded Tom for his honesty and courage, granting his family a modest estate and ensuring they would never suffer again. Miles Hendon, who had stood by Edward during his trials, was knighted and given a place of honor at court. Edward's experiences as a pauper profoundly shaped his reign. He worked tirelessly to ease the burden of his people, reforming unjust laws and ensuring fair treatment for all. Tom, now living comfortably but humbly, continued to serve as a trusted confidant, his unique perspective invaluable to the young king. The story of the prince and the pauper became a legend, a tale of identity, empathy, and the shared humanity that transcends social class. Though their lives began worlds apart, Edward and Tom proved that true nobility lies not in birth, but in character. And so, they both lived happily ever after. The end. The Emperor's New Clothes. Once upon a time, there lived an emperor who was so exceedingly fond of new clothes that he spent all his money on being well dressed. He cared nothing about his soldiers, ignored state matters, and had little interest in anything other than his wardrobe. Every hour of the day was scheduled around what he would wear. He had a coat for every hour and took great pride in showing off his outfits. People often said, "The emperor is in his dressing room," when anyone asked about him. The emperor's obsession with fashion was well known far and wide, and many tailors and merchants came to the palace to present him with the finest silks velvets, and brocades. Yet the emperor always sought something new and more extravagant. He wanted to outshine all other monarchs and have clothes that would leave everyone in awe. One day, 2 swindlers arrived in the city. They had heard of the emperor's vanity and decided to take advantage of it. They presented themselves as master weavers and claimed to make the most exquisite fabrics imaginable. Not only are our fabrics beautiful, they declared, but they are also magical. They are invisible to anyone who is stupid or unfit for their position. The emperor was intrigued. Such clothes would be perfect for me, he thought. I could use them to discover who in my kingdom is foolish or incompetent. Yes, I must have such clothes. He immediately summoned the swindlers to his court. The 2 men bowed low before the emperor and began to weave their tale. They described their fabric as being finer than spider silk, more radiant than sunlight, and so light that it felt like wearing nothing at all. The emperor was enchanted by their words and decided to commission an entire wardrobe made from this magical cloth. You shall have all the gold and silk you need, said the emperor. Begin at once and spare no expense. The swindlers set up 2 looms in a grand hall of the palace and pretended to work day and night. They demanded the finest silk and gold thread, which they promptly pocketed, while their looms remained empty. They busied themselves with great enthusiasm, moving their hands as if weaving, and describing the fabric's beauty in vivid detail to anyone who visited. After a few days, the emperor grew curious about their progress. He sent his most trusted minister to inspect the work. Go and see how the weavers are coming along, he instructed. Bring me a report of the fabric's magnificence. The minister, a wise and honest man, approached the looms with confidence, but when he entered the hall, he saw nothing on the looms. His heart sank. Can I be that unfit for my position? Am I foolish? He thought. Not wanting to admit that he saw nothing, he smiled and nodded approvingly. How splendid! What colors! What patterns! He said, though he saw nothing at all. The swindlers beamed. We are glad you like it. Please tell the emperor how marvelous the fabric is. When the minister returned to the emperor, he praised the work of the weavers. Your Majesty, the fabric is beyond compare. The colors are vibrant and the patterns are intricate. It will be the most extraordinary outfit you have ever worn. The emperor was delighted and sent another official to inspect the progress. This official, too, saw nothing on the looms, but was afraid to admit it. He returned to the emperor with glowing praise for the magical fabric. The swindlers, now emboldened by their success, demanded more gold, silk, and jewels. They continued their charade, pretending to weave and describing the fabric in increasingly extravagant terms. Word of the magical cloth spread throughout the city, and everyone was curious to see it. They whispered among themselves, wondering if they would be able to see the fabric, or if they would be revealed as fools. Finally, the emperor decided it was time to view the fabric himself. Accompanied by his ministers and courtiers, he entered the hall where the swindlers were hard at work. The two men gestured grandly to the empty looms, describing the cloth in exquisite detail. The emperor stared at the looms, his eyes widening in disbelief. He saw nothing. Am I a fool? Am I unfit to be emperor? He thought, panic rising in his chest. But he dared not admit the truth. Instead, he smiled and nodded. How magnificent, he exclaimed. The fabric is truly unparalleled. It shall be made into a suit for the grand procession tomorrow. The ministers and courtiers, not wanting to appear foolish, all agreed enthusiastically. Yes, Your Majesty, it is stunning, a masterpiece. The swindlers worked late into the night, pretending to cut and sew the invisible cloth. They announced that the emperor's new clothes were ready and helped him dress the next morning. They mimed placing the garments on him, fastening imaginary buttons, and adjusting the invisible fabric. These clothes are so light and comfortable, they said. You'll feel as though you're wearing nothing at all. The emperor admired himself in the mirror, though he saw nothing but his undergarments. I must not let anyone know that I cannot see these clothes, he thought. It would ruin me. When the emperor stepped out into the courtyard, the entire city had gathered to see his new clothes. The courtiers, who feared being exposed as fools, began to cheer and applaud. How elegant! How regal! They cried. The emperor's new clothes are a marvel. The townspeople, hearing the courtiers' praise, echoed their statements. What beautiful clothes! What exaggerant! What an extraordinary suit! They shouted. None of them dared to admit that they saw nothing, for fear of being thought stupid or unfit for their roles. The emperor beamed with pride and paraded through the streets, his head held high. The procession was grand, with banners waving and music playing. Everyone cheered and clapped as the emperor passed by, though they whispered among themselves, I see nothing at all, do you? Finally, a small child tugged at his mother's sleeve and said loudly, But the emperor isn't wearing any clothes. The mother hushed her child, but the words had already been heard. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Did you hear what the child said? He's right. The emperor isn't wearing anything. Soon, laughter erupted. The townspeople began to point and chuckle, and the emperor realized with horror that they were telling the truth. He was indeed wearing nothing at all. His face turned bright red, but he resolved to finish the procession with dignity. The emperor held his head high and continued to walk, pretending that nothing was amiss. His courtiers, too, acted as though everything were perfectly normal, though they were secretly mortified. The swindlers, meanwhile, had slipped away with the gold, silk, and jewels they had collected, and they were never seen again. From that day forward, the emperor learned a valuable lesson about vanity and pride. He became a wiser ruler, focusing less on his appearance and more on the well-being of his people. The tale of the emperor's new clothes became a legend in the kingdom, a reminder of the importance of honesty and the courage to speak the truth, even when no one else will. The End. The 12 Dancing Princesses. Once upon a time, in a kingdom surrounded by deep forests and shimmering lakes, there lived a king who had 12 beautiful daughters. These princesses were his pride and joy, and each of them was more graceful and charming than the last. They lived in a grand palace, and their bedrooms were all in a long, elegant hall, secured every night by heavy locks. Despite the king's precautions, a mystery plagued the palace that no one could solve. Every morning, the princess's shoes were found worn out, as if they had been dancing all night long. The king was baffled. He questioned his daughters, but they only smiled and said they had no idea how their shoes became so tattered. Determined to uncover the truth, the king issued a royal decree. Anyone who could discover where the princesses went at night would be rewarded with their choice of one of the princess's hands in marriage and a place in the kingdom. However, if the suitor failed after 3 nights of trying, he would forfeit his life. Many princes and noblemen from far and wide came to take up the challenge. Each one was granted a room near the princess's hall and provided with food and drink fit for a king. But every morning they awoke to find the princess's shoes just as worn as before, and not a single one of them could explain the mystery. After their 3 nights were up, they faced the grim consequences of their failure. One day, a poor but brave soldier named Michael arrived in the kingdom. He had been discharged from the army and was wandering through the land with nothing but his wits and a few coins in his pocket. On his way, he encountered an old woman sitting by the roadside. She appeared frail, but had a wise, kind face. Sensing his troubles, she asked, "Where are you headed, young man?" Michael told her about the king's decree and the mystery of the 12 dancing princesses. The old woman listened intently and then handed him a small cloak. "This is a cloak of invisibility," she said. "Use it wisely, for it will help you to discover the secret of the princesses. But beware, you must not drink anything they offer you." Michael thanked her and set off for the palace. When he arrived, he presented himself to the king and declared his intention to solve the mystery. The king, though skeptical, allowed him to try. That evening, Michael was given a comfortable room near the princess's chambers. Before dinner, the eldest princess, Princess Annabelle, brought him a goblet of wine. Remembering the old woman's warning, Michael pretended to drink, but secretly poured the wine into a nearby plant. When the time came for the princesses to retire for the night, Michael wrapped himself in the cloak of invisibility and followed them to their chambers. From his hiding spot, he watched as the 12 sisters, dressed in their finest gowns and adored themselves with jewels. They looked as if they were preparing for a grand ball. At midnight, Princess Annabel clapped her hands, and a secret door in the floor opened. One by one, the princesses descended a hidden staircase, giggling and whispering excitedly. Michael slipped through the door behind them, careful to remain silent. The staircase spiraled downward for what seemed like forever, until it opened into an enchanting underground world. Trees were made of silver, gold, and diamonds, their leaves shimmering in the soft glow of lanterns. Michael was awestruck, but kept his focus on the princesses. He broke off a small branch from each type of tree as proof of his journey. The path led to a lake where 12 boats awaited, each manned by a handsome prince. The princesses stepped into the boats, laughing and chatting with their escorts, and were ferried across the water to a magnificent palace. Music floated through the air, and inside a grand ballroom awaited. The princesses danced with their princess, their movements so graceful it seemed as if they were gliding on air. Michael watched from the shadows, taking care not to be seen. The princesses danced until their shoes were worn through, and only then did they return to the boats and began their journey back. Michael followed them, retracing his steps up the secret staircase and slipping back into his room just as the sun began to rise. The next morning, the princesses were surprised to see Michael alive and well. Princess Annabel, in particular, seemed uneasy. When the king summoned Michael and asked if he had solved the mystery, Michael replied, "Your Majesty, I have discovered the truth. Last night, your daughters traveled to an underground palace where they danced with 12 princes until their shoes were worn through." The king was astonished. "Can you prove this?" he asked. Michael presented the branches he had taken from the silver, gold, and diamond trees as evidence. The king called for his daughters, who could not deny the truth. Princess Annabel confessed, explaining that they had been enchanted by the princes and compelled to dance with them every night. As a reward for his bravery and cleverness, Michael was given the choice of one of the princesses to marry. Though all the sisters were lovely, he chose Princess Lily, whose kindness and gentle heart had touched him deeply. The king kept his promise, and Michael and Lily were married in a grand ceremony that united the kingdom in celebration. As for the enchanted princes, their spell was broken, and they returned to their own realm, leaving the princesses free from their nightly compulsion. And so, the mystery of the 12 dancing princesses became a tale passed down through generations, a reminder of the courage and resourcefulness that can unravel even the most magical of secrets. And the princesses and Michael lived happily ever after. The end. The Snow Queen. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between snowy mountains and vast forests, there lived 2 children named Kai and Gerda. They were not siblings, but loved each other as if they were. Kai lived with his grandmother, who often told the children stories of the Snow Queen, a powerful and mysterious figure who ruled over winter with her icy magic. Gerda lived next door, and the two children spent their days playing in the flower-filled gardens that connected their homes, dreaming of adventures and marveling at the world around them. One winter evening, as snowflakes danced outside their windows, Kai's grandmother told them the tale of the Snow Queen's magic mirror. According to legend, the mirror had been created by a wicked troll. It had the power to distort everything it reflected, making beautiful things appear ugly and kind hearts seem cruel. One day, the mirror shattered, and its shards were scattered across the world. The tiniest splinters of the mirror could pierce a person's eye or heart, turning them cold and unfeeling. The children shivered at the thought, but Gerda dismissed it as just a story, while Kai stared thoughtfully into the night. Winter turned colder, and one fateful day, as Kai and Gerda were playing in the snow, a strange thing happened. A shard of the troll's mirror, carried by the wind, lodged itself in Kai's eye. Another shard pierced his heart. At first, Kai felt only a slight sting, but soon he began to change. The world appeared harsh and ugly to him, and he grew distant from Gerda. The flowers they had once adored now seemed dull, and he mocked Gerda's warmth and kindness. Despite her confusion and hurt, Gerda tried to reach him, but Kai's heart had begun to freeze. One evening, as the snow fell heavily, a magnificent sleigh appeared in the village square, driven by a woman cloaked in dazzling white. It was the Snow Queen herself, her icy beauty both mesmerizing and terrifying. She called to Kai, who, entranced by her presence, climbed into her sleigh without hesitation. As they sped away into the night, the Snow Queen placed a cold kiss on Kai's forehead, erasing his memories of home and binding him to her will. When Gerda discovered that Kai was missing, she was devastated. The villagers searched high and low, but there was no trace of him. Refusing to believe he was lost forever, Gerda decided to find him herself. Armed with nothing but her determination and a small bundle of provisions, she set out on a journey that would take her far beyond the safety of her village. Gerda's first stop was the riverbank, where she wept and pleaded for help. To her astonishment, the river seemed to answer her prayers. A small boat appeared, and as if guided by unseen hands, it carried her downstream to a beautiful garden. There, Gerda met an old woman who tended a magical garden where it was always summer. The woman, who had a kind but lonely heart, cast a spell to make Gerda forget her quest, hoping to keep her as a companion. But as time passed, Gerda's memories of Kai began to resurface. When she saw a rose blooming in the garden, she remembered the flowers they had loved and realized she needed to continue her journey. Gerda escaped the garden and wandered into a dark and foreboding forest. There, she encountered a crow who spoke in a raspy but kind voice. The crow told Gerda of a young prince who resembled Kai and who lived in a nearby castle. Filled with hope, Gerda followed the crow to the castle, where she met the prince and princess. Though the prince was not Kai, the royal couple were moved by Gerda's courage and gave her warm clothes and a golden carriage to aid her journey. As Gerda traveled further north, the golden carriage attracted the attention of robbers. Her carriage was attacked, and she was taken captive by a band of thieves. Among them was a fierce and wild robber girl who took a liking to Gerda. The robber girl, impressed by Gerda's determination and bravery, decided to help her. She gave Gerda her pet reindeer, Bay, who knew the way to the Snow Queen's palace. With Bay as her guide, Gerda crossed frozen rivers, climbed icy mountains, and braved howling winds. Along the way, she encountered strange and magical beings. A wise old woman who gave her advice, and another woman who taught her the power of her own love and determination. These encounters strengthened Gerda's resolve and prepared her for the final leg of her journey. At last, Gerda reached the Snow Queen's palace, a towering fortress of ice and snow. The walls glittered like diamonds, and the air was so cold it seemed to bite. Inside, she found Kai sitting on a frozen throne, his face pale and expressionless. The Snow Queen had given him a task: to arrange pieces of ice into a perfect word. If he succeeded, she promised him freedom, but the task was impossible. The shards of the mirror in his eye and his heart had made him forget everything, even Gerda. Gerda approached Kai, her heart breaking at the sight of him. She called his name, but he did not respond. Desperate, she embraced him and wept, her warm tears falling onto his chest. Her love and sorrow melted the ice around his heart, and the shards of the mirror dissolved. Kai's eyes filled with tears as he recognized Gerda. "Gerda," he whispered, "you've saved me." The Snow Queen's magic was no match for the power of Gerda's love. The palace began to crumble, and the icy winds calmed. Gerda and Kai, holding hands, escaped the palace and began their journey home. Along the way, they marveled at the beauty of the world around them, which now seemed brighter and more vibrant than ever before. When they returned to their village, they found that the seasons had changed. The snow had melted, giving way to blooming flowers and warm sunlight. Kai and Gerda's bond was stronger than ever, and their story became a legend, a testament to the power of love, courage, and perseverance. And so, Kai and Gerda lived happily ever after, cherishing the warmth in their hearts and the beauty of the world they had fought so hard to see again. The end. The Emperor and the Nightingale. Once upon a time, in the vast empire of China, there lived an empire who resided in a magnificent palace made of the finest porcelain. The palace was so delicate and splendid that even the slightest touch could break it. Surrounding the palace was an exquisite garden filled with the most beautiful flowers, each carefully arranged by expert gardeners. Beyond the garden lay a vast forest, and in that forest lived a little grey nightingale whose song was said to be the most beautiful in the entire empire. Travelers from every corner of the world came to the emperor's palace to marvel at its beauty and the grandeur of the empire. They wrote books and poems about the palace, the gardens, and the wonders of China. Yet amidst all the splendor, what impressed visitors most was the song of the little nightingale. Its voice was so enchanting that those who heard it often wept with joy. The emperor, however, knew nothing of the nightingale. He was a man consumed by the beauty of his possessions and the praise of his courtiers, who surrounded him day and night. No one in the court had ever mentioned the nightingale to him, for they were too busy flattering him and boasting of the wonders of the palace. One day, the emperor received a book from a foreign king. As he flipped through the pages, he read about the palace, the gardens, and the nightingale. The book praised the bird's song above all else, calling it the greatest treasure of the empire. The emperor was surprised and angered. "What is this nightingale?" he demanded. "How is it that I, the Emperor of China, do not know of such a treasure in my own kingdom? Why has no one told me?" The courtiers were flustered and confused. They had never paid attention to the bird and were too afraid to admit their ignorance. The emperor ordered them to find the nightingale and bring it to him at once. "If it is as wonderful as the book says, I wish to hear it sing tonight," he commanded. The courtiers searched high and low, but had no idea where to find the bird. Finally, they came upon a poor kitchen maid who worked in the palace. She was the only one who knew the nightingale well, for she often wandered into the forest to gather herbs and berries and would listen to its song. "Oh yes," the maid said, "I know the nightingale. Its song is so lovely that it makes my heart swell with joy. I can take you to it." The courtiers followed the maid deep into the forest until they came to a large tree. There, perched on a branch, was the little grey bird. "Is this the famous nightingale?" one courtier asked in disbelief. "It looks so plain and ordinary." But as the nightingale began to sing, its voice silenced their doubts. But as the nightingale began to sing, its voice silenced their doubts. The courtiers were moved to tears, and they begged the bird to come to the palace and sing for the emperor. The nightingale was humble and kind. "My song is best heard in the forest where I am free," it said. "But I will come to the palace to sing for the emperor if it pleases him. That evening, the nightingale was brought before the emperor. It sang a melody so pure and beautiful that the emperor's heart melted. He was moved to tears, as well as the courtiers. "Such a voice must remain in my palace," the emperor declared. "I will keep the nightingale here, and it shall sing for me every day." Though the nightingale wished to remain free, it agreed to stay in the palace out of kindness. The emperor placed it in a golden cage and allowed it to fly around the palace gardens, under supervision, of course. The bird sang every day, and its song brought great joy to everyone in the court. One day, a package arrived at the palace. Inside was a mechanical nightingale, a gift from the Emperor of Japan. The mechanical bird was covered in gold and jewels, and when wound up, it sang a tune that mimicked the real nightingale's song. The court was dazzled by its glittering appearance and perfect precision. The emperor declared that the mechanical bird was superior to the real one. "It does not tire, and its song is always the same," he said. "We no longer need the real nightingale." The real nightingale was heartbroken, but did not complain. It flew back to the forest, where it could sing freely once more. The court, meanwhile, celebrated the mechanical bird and praised it endlessly. They wound it up every day, and it sang the same song over and over again. The emperor was delighted and proclaimed it his favorite possession. For a time, all was well, but then the mechanical bird began to wear out. Its gears and springs grew rusty, and its song became less melodious. The courtiers tried to repair it, but it could only sing a few notes before breaking down entirely. The emperor was devastated and fell into a deep melancholy. Without the nightingale's song, the palace felt empty and cold. Years passed, and the emperor grew old and ill. He lay in his bed, surrounded by silence. The courtiers had abandoned him, fearing his impending death. Alone and despairing, the emperor longed to hear the nightingale's song once more. As he lay in the stillness of his chamber, a sweet and familiar melody filled the air. It was the real nightingale, perched on the windowsill. The bird had heard of the emperor's illness and returned to comfort him. The nightingale sang of love, hope, and renewal. Its song was so moving that the emperor's heart lightened, and he felt a renewed strength. Tears streamed down his face as he listened, and he realized the error of his ways. "Dear nightingale," he said, "I was foolish to value the false over the true. Please, forgive me and stay." The nightingale replied, "I cannot stay within your palace walls, but I will come and sing for you whenever you wish. My song is a gift, not something to be possessed." The emperor nodded, his heart full of gratitude. The nightingale sang one final song before flying back to the forest. The emperor recovered from his illness and ruled with wisdom and kindness. He often visited the forest to hear the nightingale's song. Cherishing it, as the greatest treasure of his empire. The tale of the Emperor and the Nightingale spread far and wide, a reminder of the value of true beauty, freedom, and the simple joys of life. And so, the Emperor and the Nightingale remained friends until the end of their days, each bringing joy to the other in their own way, and they lived happily ever after. The end. The King and the Golden Mountain. Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, there was a poor merchant who had fallen upon hard times. He had lost nearly all his wealth and was left with little more than his wits and a single small house where he lived with his young son. Despite their poverty, the merchant loved his son dearly and would do anything to ensure his happiness and future. One day, while sitting by the fireplace and lamenting his misfortune, the merchant heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, he saw a strange man, cloaked in black. The man's eyes glimmered with a mysterious light, and his voice was deep and commanding as he said, "Good evening, merchant. I know of your troubles, and I have come to offer you a way to regain your fortune." The merchant, though wary, was desperate. "What is your proposal, stranger?" he asked. The man smiled and said, "I will make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. Gold, jewels, and treasures will be yours. In return, you must give me the first thing that brushes against your leg when you return home." The merchant hesitated. What could the man mean by such a strange request? But as he thought of his debts and his son's future, he agreed. "Very well," he said, shaking the stranger's hand. The man handed the merchant a small bag filled with gold coins. "Your fortune will grow with time," he said. "But remember your promise. The first thing that touches your leg when you return home is mine." The merchant thanked the man and hurried home, clutching the bag of gold. As he approached his house, his heart grew lighter. But as soon as he opened the door, his young son came running to greet him, throwing his arms around his father's legs in joy. The merchant's heart sank. He realized too late what he had agreed to. The first thing to touch him was his beloved son. Grief and regret filled him, but the strange man was true to his word. The very next day, the man appeared to take the boy away. "I will not harm him," the man said, "but he will be taken to a faraway land to fulfill his destiny. You will not see him for many years." Despite his protests, the merchant had no choice but to let the man take his son. The boy was spirited away to a magical land, leaving the merchant to mourn his loss. However, as promised, the merchant's fortune grew, and he became one of the richest men in the kingdom. Yet all his wealth could not fill the void left by his son's absence. Meanwhile, the boy grew up in a strange but beautiful kingdom. This land was ruled by a king who lived in a golden palace atop a high mountain. The boy learned many skills, from swordsmanship to diplomacy, and became strong and clever. He did not forget his father, but grew to accept his new life. One day, when the boy had come of age, the king summoned him to the palace. "You have served me well," the king said. "Now I will grant you a chance to return to your world, but first you must complete a task. You must descend into the Valley of Shadows and retrieve the golden apple that grows on the Tree of Wisdom. Only then will you be free to return to your father." The boy agreed, determined to reunite with his father. He set off on his journey, armed with nothing but a sword and a small pouch of provisions. The Valley of Shadows was a dark and foreboding place, filled with twisting paths and strange creatures. The boy faced many dangers, from treacherous cliffs to fierce beasts, but his courage and cleverness saw him through. At last, he reached the Tree of Wisdom, its branches laden with golden apples that glowed softly in the dim light. As he reached for one, a voice spoke from the shadows. "Who dares to take the fruit of wisdom?" it asked. The boy replied, "I am but a humble traveler, seeking to fulfill my destiny. I mean no harm." The voice laughed. "To take the golden apple, you must answer my riddle. Fail, and you will be trapped here forever." The boy nodded, ready to face the challenge. The voice said, "I am not alive, yet I grow. I do not have lungs, yet I need air. I have no mouth, yet water kills me. What am I?" The boy thought carefully. At last he answered, "You are fire." The voice fell silent, and then it said, "You have answered correctly. Take the apple and go." The boy plucked a golden apple from the tree and began his journey back to the Golden Mountain. Along the way, he encountered many who tried to steal the apple or trick him into giving it up, but he held fast and finally returned to the king's palace. The king was pleased. "You have proven yourself worthy," he said. "Now you may return to your father. But beware, your journey will not be easy, for the world you left has changed." The boy thanked the king and set off for his father's home. When he arrived, he found the house much larger and grander than he remembered. His father, now an old man, was overjoyed to see him, but was also filled with sorrow. "I thought I'd lost you forever," the merchant said. The boy embraced his father and told him of his adventures. Together, they rebuilt their bond and lived comfortably for many years. The boy's courage and determination became a legend, and the tale of the king and the Golden Mountain was passed down through generations as a reminder of the value of perseverance and the power of destiny. And the boy and his father lived happily ever after. The end. Thank you for listening to this bedtime story. I hope you enjoyed the tale tonight. If you did, Please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more audiobooks and tales to come. Until next time.